The red earth of Lagos Island trembled beneath the weight of expectation as thousands gathered at Tafawa Balewa Square. The harmattan winds carried the scent of burning frankincense and the distant sound of talking drums echoing from the ancient shrines of Ido. Today was no ordinary day, it was Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu's 60th birthday, and the celebration would be remembered in the oral traditions of the Yoruba people for generations to come. Omo Iko and I wa o, children of Lagos we are, the crowd chanted as vendors weaved through the masses, selling roasted plantains and fresh palm wine. The sun hung like a golden calabash in the azure sky, its rays dancing across the colorful Ankara fabrics that adorned the celebrants. Women balanced trays of puff-puff and chin-chin on their heads while men in flowing Igbada robes adjusted their fila caps, preparing for what the griots had whispered would be a battle of spirits disguised as celebration. Governor Sanwo-Olu stood on the elevated platform, his white Igbada gleaming like moonlight on the Lagos lagoon. At 60, his face carried the wisdom lines of a man who had navigated the treacherous waters of Nigerian politics while keeping his soul anchored to the traditions of his ancestors. His eyes, dark as the bottom of the Ogun River, scanned the crowd with the protective gaze of a father watching over his children. But there was another presence that day, one that would transform celebration into legend. From the neighboring state of Osun came Governor Adeleke, known throughout Yorubaland as the Dancing Senator. His reputation preceded him like the morning mist over the Osun River. Wherever Adeleke went, joy followed, and wherever joy gathered, the ancestors awakened to witness the ancient art of rhythmic expression. The air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation as the two governors greeted each other with the elaborate handshake of Yoruba elders. The younger man in the crowd whispered stories they had heard from their fathers about the power of dance in Yoruba culture, how it could summon rain in drought, heal divisions between communities, and even change the course of destiny itself. "Bawo and I, my brother," Sanwo-Olu said, his voice carrying the musical inflection of Lagos Yoruba. "Welcome to our celebration." Adeleke's response came with a characteristic grin that had charmed voters from Eid to Osogbo. "The honor is mine, Egben. But I smell something in the air today. The ancestors are restless and they hunger for something more than just political speeches." As if summoned by their words, the traditional drummers began their ancient call. The dun-dun drums spoke in the language of the Orishas, their deep bass notes reverberating through the chests of every person present. The bata drums joined the conversation, their sharp staccato rhythms cutting through the humid air like lightning through storm clouds. And beneath it all, the gentle shakir rattles whispered secrets only the initiated could understand. Elder Mama Adani, keeper of the oral traditions and the oldest woman in attendance at 93 years, rose from her seat with the aid of her ornately carved walking stick. Her voice, weathered by decades of storytelling, cut through the musical cacophony with supernatural clarity. "Listen, children of Odujuwa," she called, and instantly the crowd fell silent. Even the drums seemed to pause in respect. "I have lived through the coming of the white man, through independence, through military rule, and through democracy. I have seen governors come and go like seasons, but rarely have I witnessed two leaders whose spirits dance in harmony with the ancient rhythms." She pointed her walking stick toward the two governors, and those who understood the old ways felt a shift in the spiritual atmosphere. "Today the ancestors speak through me. They say that in times of division, when brother fights brother and tribe wars against tribe, only through the sacred dance can unity be restored. They challenge you, sons of Yorubaland, to show us that leadership is not just about words and policies, but about the courage to let your spirits move with the rhythm of truth." Governor Sanwo-Olu felt the weight of tradition settling on his shoulders like a heavy Igbada passed down through generations. In his youth, before the weight of governance bent his back, he had been known for his moves at Lagos Island social gatherings. But could those old rhythms still flow through his 60-year-old frame? Adeleke, meanwhile, felt the familiar stirring in his bones that had made him famous across Nigeria. But this was different from his usual campaign trail performances. This was sacred ground, and the challenge came not from political opponents but from the very spirits of his ancestors. The crowd began to form a large circle, as tradition demanded for important spiritual events. Children were lifted onto shoulders so they could witness what their own children would one day tell their grandchildren. The circle grew wider and wider, encompassing nearly the entire square, with the two governors standing in the center like ancient warriors preparing for honorable combat. The praise singers began their work, their voices weaving together the genealogies of both men, tracing their lineages back through the mists of time to the great kingdoms of Ife and Oyo. They sang of Sanwo-Olu's ancestors who had fished the waters of Lagos Lagoon before the Portuguese ships appeared on the horizon. They praised Adeleke's forebears who had served in the court of the Alafin of Oyo, their wisdom helping to guide the destiny of the Yoruba people. As the praise songs continued, something mystical began to happen. The very air seemed to shimmer with the presence of the ancestors. Those sensitive to spiritual matters later swore they saw shadowy figures dancing at the edges of the circle, great kings and queens of old, watching to see if their descendants still remembered the sacred ways. The master drummer, Baba Adegoke, a man whose family had served the traditional rulers of Lagos for 7 generations, stepped forward with his dun-dun drum strapped across his shoulder. His weathered hands, scarred by decades of drumming, began to speak the ancient language that connected earth to heaven, human to divine. Bap bap bap, the drum called, and every Yoruba heart in the crowd responded with recognition. This was the rhythm that had echoed through the forests of Yorubaland for over 1,000 years, the same rhythm that had accompanied warriors into battle, brides to their wedding ceremonies, and kings to their coronations. Governor Sanwo-Olu closed his eyes and let the rhythm wash over him. In his mind, he saw the Lagos of his childhood, before the glass towers and concrete highways, when the island still pulsed with the rhythms of fishing boats and traditional markets. He remembered his grandmother, Mama Adeleke, who had taught him that every step in traditional dance was a prayer, every movement a conversation with the gods. His body began to sway almost imperceptibly at first, just a gentle rocking that matched the deep bass of the dun-dun. The crowd held its collective breath as they watched their governor, a man known for his measured, diplomatic demeanor, begin to surrender to the ancient call. Adeleke, standing across from him in the circle, felt the familiar fire beginning to build in his legs. But this was different from his usual exuberant performances. This felt sacred, weighted with the expectations of both the living and the dead. He had danced at political rallies, at social gatherings, at family celebrations, but never had he felt such a profound connection to something larger than himself. The bata drums joined the conversation, their talking rhythms weaving complex patterns that told stories of love and loss, triumph and tragedy, power and humility. The lead bata spoke in the voice of Sango, the thunder god, demanding truth and justice. The supporting drums responded with the gentler voices of Yamoja and Osun, calling for peace and prosperity. Young Kemi, a journalism student from the University of Lagos who had come to cover the political event, found herself transfixed by what was unfolding before her eyes. This was not the sterile, choreographed political theater she had expected. This was something primal, something that reached back to the roots of what it meant to be Yoruba, what it meant to be human. She pulled out her phone to record, then hesitated. Some moments, her grandmother had always told her, were too sacred for cameras. Some truths could only be preserved in memory and passed down through story. The first movement came from Sanwo-Olu, a slow, deliberate step that acknowledged the weight of leadership. His right foot moved forward, then his left, each step measured and purposeful like the decisions he made daily for the 10 million souls under his care. His arms rose slowly, palms facing upward toward the ancestors, asking for their blessing on his governance. The crowd murmured its approval. This was not the flashy, attention-grabbing movement they might have expected from a politician, but something deeper. The dance of a leader who understood that power was a sacred trust, not a personal playground. Adeleke watched his colleagues' movements with growing respect. He had expected perhaps some awkward swaying, the kind of hesitant movement that older politicians sometimes attempted to seem connected to the people. Instead, he was witnessing something authentic, something rooted in genuine understanding of Yoruba spiritual tradition. When his turn came, Adeleke's response was swift and joyful. His legs seemed to unlock some hidden spring as he bounced with the infectious energy that had made him beloved across Nigeria. But even in his exuberance there was reverence. His movements told the story of celebration within tradition, of joy that honored rather than mocked the sacred. The two governors began to move in dialogue with each other, their dance becoming a conversation about leadership, responsibility, and the delicate balance between serving the people and serving oneself. Sanwo-Olu's measured steps spoke of careful planning and thoughtful governance. Adeleke's energetic bounds spoke of enthusiasm and connection with the grassroots. Mama Adeleke, watching from her place of honor, nodded her approval. "See how they dance," she said to the younger women gathered around her. "The steady one speaks with the voice of the earth, solid, reliable, enduring. The joyful one speaks with the voice of water, flowing, adaptable, life-giving. Both are needed for the land to flourish." The musicians, sensing the sacred nature of what was unfolding, began to weave more complex rhythms. The Ojin bells joined the conversation, their clear metallic voices calling attention to moments of particular spiritual significance. The Sakir shakers whispered encouragement, their gentle rattling like rain on palm fronds. As the dance continued, something remarkable happened. Other dignitaries began to join the circle. State commissioners, local government chairmen, traditional rulers. One by one, they stepped forward to add their own movements to the growing spiritual celebration. What had begun as a challenge between two governors was becoming a communal affirmation of Yoruba identity and values. Chief Adebayo, the Oba of a neighboring community, entered the circle with the stately movements of traditional royalty. His dance was ancient and formal, each gesture carrying centuries of protocol and meaning. Behind him came younger politicians, their movements more contemporary but still respectful of the sacred space that had been created. As the sun reached its zenith, casting short shadows that seemed to dance along with the human figures in the circle, the true purpose of the ancestral challenge began to reveal itself. This was not about competition or showmanship. This was about unity. Governor Sanwo-Olu, his white agbada now damp with perspiration but his spirit soaring, extended his hand toward Adeleke. The gesture was simple but profound, an invitation to dance together rather than in opposition to each other. Adeleke grasped the outstretched hand, and in that moment, the crowd erupted in celebration. The two governors began to move in unison, their different styles complementing rather than competing with each other. Sanwo-Olu's stability provided the foundation for Adeleke's creativity. Adeleke's joy lifted Sanwo-Olu's formality into something transcendent. The praise singers raised their voices in a new song, one that seemed to compose itself in real time as they witnessed the miracle unfolding before them. When the steady earth meets the flowing water, gardens bloom in the desert places. When the wise elder embraces the joyful youth, the ancestors smile from their sacred spaces. Dance, sons of Odujuwa, dance. Let your steps unite what politics would divide. In the rhythm of your feet, we hear the heartbeat of the tribe. The political implications of what was happening were not lost on the crowd. In a nation often divided along ethnic, religious, and political lines, here were two leaders from the same party but different states, showing that cooperation was possible, that diversity could be strength rather than weakness. Journalist Kemi, who had finally decided to put away her phone and simply experience the moment, found tears streaming down her face. Her generation had grown up hearing stories of the golden age of African leadership, when politicians were statesmen and governance was viewed as sacred service. For the first time in her young life, she was seeing those stories come alive. The dance evolved throughout the afternoon, incorporating movements from different Yoruba subgroups. There were the precise, martial movements of the Lagos tradition, reflecting the discipline needed to govern a megacity. There were the flowing, agricultural movements of the Osun tradition, honoring the fertility of the land and the nurturing aspect of leadership. Traditional praise singers from both states took turns telling the stories of their respective governors' achievements, but in a way that celebrated collaboration rather than competition. They spoke of Sanwo-Olu's infrastructure projects that had connected Lagos to the rest of Nigeria, making it easier for people like those from Osun to come and share in the prosperity. They praised Adeleke's cultural preservation efforts that had kept traditions alive for events exactly like this one. As the afternoon wore on and the shadows began to lengthen, the energy of the celebration reached a crescendo that seemed to call down the very presence of the divine. The master drummer increased the tempo, and the entire crowd began to move in a vast, undulating wave of human rhythm. Elder Mama Aduni rose once again, but this time her movement was different. Despite her 93 years, she began to dance with a grace and energy that seemed impossible for someone her age. Those who understood such matters recognized that she was no longer simply herself. She had become a vessel for ancestral wisdom. Her voice, when she spoke, carried harmonics that seemed to come from multiple sources. Children of the soil, children of the water, children of the air and fire, she called, her words seeming to echo from the very ground beneath their feet. Today you have shown that the old ways are not dead, that leadership can still be a sacred calling, that dance can still heal the divisions that words create. She approached the two governors, who immediately knelt in respect. From somewhere in her wrapper she produced two small objects, traditional carved figures representing unity and prosperity. Take these, she said, placing one in each governor's palm. Let them remind you that your dance today was witnessed not only by the living but by all those who came before. Let them remind you that governance is not about building monuments to yourself, but about creating harmony among the people you serve. The gifts were simple, carved from Irako wood by craftsmen whose families had been creating such objects for generations. But in the context of the moment, they carried the weight of commissioning, of responsibility, of sacred trust. Governor Sanwo-Olu accepted his gift with both hands, bowing deeply. Mama, we will remember this day and carry its lessons into our governance. The dance will continue in our policies, in our interaction with each other, and in our service to our people. Governor Adeleke, equally moved, added, the rhythm that united us today will echo in everything we do. When politicians in Abuja try to divide us, we will remember this dance. When ethnic tensions rise, we will remember that we are all children of the same ancestors. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that they were witnessing something historic. Phones finally came out, not to post on social media for immediate gratification, but to preserve for posterity what would become one of the defining moments of contemporary Yoruba political culture. As the formal celebration began to wind down, the informal one continued. The circle had broken into smaller groups, with families and communities continuing their own versions of the sacred dance. Children who had watched their leaders move with such dignity and purpose now attempted their own interpretations, their small bodies swaying with unconscious grace. The vendors who had been selling food throughout the day now moved through the crowds, offering their wares for free. Today was blessed, explained Mama Folake, who had been selling akara at such events for 30 years. When the ancestors dance with us, everything becomes sacred, even our small contributions. The praise singers continued their work, but now they were creating new verses in real time, composing the oral history that would carry this day forward into future generations. They sang of the harmony between different leadership styles, of the power of tradition to bridge political gaps, of the importance of remembering cultural roots even while embracing modern governance. Young Adebola, a political science student who had come hoping to interview the governors about policy positions, found himself instead frantically scribbling notes about something far more important: the demonstration that African leadership traditions could still provide relevant guidance for contemporary challenges. This changes everything, he murmured to his friend Taiwo, who was studying at the same university. We've been so focused on copying Western models of political engagement that we forgot we have our own sophisticated traditions of community building and conflict resolution. The two governors, now exhausted but spiritually energized, sat together on the platform, sharing palm wine from the same calabash in the traditional gesture of brotherhood. Around them, their security details and staff members watched with amazement as their principals, usually so concerned with protocol and political positioning, laughed and talked like old friends. You know, Sanwo-Olu said, wiping sweat from his brow, I haven't felt this connected to my purpose in years. Sometimes the daily grind of governance makes you forget why you wanted to serve in the first place. Adeleke nodded, his famous smile now carrying a deeper contentment. The ancestors reminded us today that politics should be about bringing people together, not driving them apart. When we dance, we remember that we're all human beings before we're politicians. News of the extraordinary celebration spread throughout Nigeria faster than the traditional talking drums could have carried it in ancient times. Social media exploded with videos and photos, but more importantly, the story began to take on a life of its own in the oral tradition. In Lagos, children playing in the streets incorporated the governor's dance moves into their games. In Osun, traditional priests noted that the day's events had been blessed with unusual spiritual activity. Birds had flocked to the celebration site, and the normally dry harmattan winds had carried the scent of rain. Political commentators initially struggled to understand what they had witnessed. Some tried to dismiss it as mere political theater, but the authenticity of the moment was too powerful to be easily undermined. Others recognized it as something unprecedented in contemporary Nigerian politics, a genuine expression of cultural unity that transcended party lines and personal ambition. Dr. Funmilayo Adegoke, a political scientist at the University of Ibadan, would later write in her analysis, "What we witnessed at Governor Sanwo-Olu's 60th birthday celebration was nothing less than the resurrection of traditional African political culture in a contemporary context. The dance was not mere entertainment but a sophisticated form of diplomatic communication that our ancestors would have recognized immediately." In neighboring states, other governors began to take notice. Governor Seyi Makinde of Oyo State announced that he would be incorporating traditional cultural elements into his upcoming state anniversary celebration. Governor Dapo Abiodun of Ogun State privately reached out to both Sanwo-Olu and Adeleke to discuss the possibility of a tri-state cultural cooperation initiative. But perhaps most significantly, ordinary citizens began to see their leaders differently. The image of two powerful men humbling themselves before ancestral wisdom and community expectations challenged the cynical assumption that all politicians were motivated purely by self-interest. Mama Raliat, a market woman from Mushin, expressed what many felt. When I saw our governor dancing with such respect for our traditions, I felt proud to be from Lagos for the first time in years. These men showed us that they remember where they come from. As evening approached and the crowds began to thin, those who remained were the ones most sensitive to the spiritual undercurrents of what had transpired. Traditional priests and priestesses, Islamic clerics who understood the intersection between faith and culture, and Christian pastors who recognized the biblical principle of honoring one's ancestors all spoke of feeling a tangible shift in the spiritual atmosphere. Baba Ifeimi, a respected priest of Ifa who had traveled from Ile-Ife specifically for the celebration, explained to a small gathering, "What happened today was not just political theater or cultural exhibition. The ancestors actually descended and danced among us." When leaders humble themselves before the wisdom of those who came before, when they acknowledge that power is a temporary trust rather than a permanent possession, the spiritual realm responds. The master drummer, Baba Adeleke, began to pack his instruments with the reverence of a priest concluding a sacred ritual. His dun-dun drum, which had provided the rhythmic foundation for the entire celebration, seemed to pulse with residual energy. "These drums have spoken at the coronation of kings," he told a group of young musicians who had gathered to learn from him. "They have called warriors to battle and welcomed them home in victory. But rarely have they witnessed such pure harmony between different expressions of leadership. Today they sang the song of unity that our people have been waiting to hear." The praise singers, too, recognized that they had been part of something historic. Ekwe Ademola, whose family had served as court praise singers for the traditional rulers of Lagos for 6 generations, spoke of the challenge of capturing in words what had essentially been a spiritual experience. "We have praise songs for brave warriors, wise kings and prosperous merchants," he said. "But today we needed new words for something our fathers never saw, politicians who remembered that they are servants of the people and children of the ancestors before they are anything else." As darkness fell, solar-powered lights illuminated the square, but many people remained, reluctant to let the magic of the day dissipate. Families spread mats on the ground and shared evening meals, continuing the communal spirit that had been awakened by the dance. As the official celebration concluded with a final prayer led by representatives of the major faiths present, Christianity, Islam, and traditional African religion, the two governors made a commitment that would outlast any political term or party affiliation. Standing together before the remaining crowd, with Elder Mama Adani serving as witness, they clasped hands and spoke words that would be remembered as the covenant of the dance. Governor Sanwo-Olu spoke first. "By the ancestors who witnessed our movements today, by the children who watched and learned, by the citizens who honored us with their presence, I commit to governing with the same spirit of harmony and respect that guided our dance. When challenges come that would divide our states, our parties, or our people, I will remember the rhythm that united us here." Governor Adeleke responded, "And I pledge that the joy and authenticity that moved my feet today will continue to guide my hands in service of our people. When others seek to corrupt or co-opt our leadership, when the temptation comes to serve self instead of community, I will remember that the ancestors are watching and the children are learning from our example." Together they spoke the final words, "May this dance echo through the corridors of power, may its rhythm guide our decisions, and may its spirit of unity spread throughout our beloved Nigeria." The crowd responded with a thunderous "S," the Yoruba affirmation that translates roughly as, "So be it," or "May it come to pass." But the word carried deeper meaning in this context, invoking the power of collective intention to shape reality. As people finally began to disperse, many carrying small portions of the blessed food to share with family members who could not attend, the talking drums played one final message. In the ancient language that connected sound to meaning, rhythm to reality, they spoke words that roughly translated to, "When leaders dance with humility, the people prosper. When power remembers its roots, the community flourishes. Let all who hear this rhythm remember the day when governance became worship and politics became prayer." In the weeks and months that followed, the story of the governor's dance would be told and retold, each telling adding new layers of meaning and interpretation. Children would ask their grandparents to explain what they had witnessed, and the elders would speak of the day when politicians remembered they were human beings first. The dance became a symbol of what was possible when African leadership traditions were honored rather than abandoned, when cultural authenticity was valued over foreign validation, when community celebration was prioritized over individual glorification. Years later, when political scientists studied the period of improved interstate cooperation that followed, many would trace its origins to a single afternoon when two governors danced together in the red dust of Lagos Island, guided by the wisdom of ancestors and witnessed by the hopes of generations yet unborn. And in the oral tradition of the Yoruba people, The story would take its place among the great tales of leadership and unity, told around fires and at festivals, reminding future generations that true power lies not in dominance but in service, not in division but in the sacred dance of community. The drums would remember. The praise singers would remember. The ancestors would remember. And most importantly, the children who watched that day would grow up knowing that politics could be prayer, that governance could be worship, and that when leaders humble themselves before the wisdom of those who came before, the very earth itself dances in celebration of unity restored and community renewed. Essay.